Welcome back to Manga Storia. Today I want to talk about Alice in Borderland, a show that went to Netflix, and the differences between the manga and the live-action show's endings, okay? But in order to understand this, I do need to explain a couple of things involved in Alice in Borderland. So what I'm saying is, you're gonna get spoilers for basically the general premise of Alice in Borderland, and then we're gonna heavily spoil the ending and the differences between the manga and the live-action show. But if you're going to stick out the video and you want to watch it yourself, trust me, spoiling the ending is oddly enough not going to ruin the show, and you'll understand why in a minute. So let's get into it. Alice in Borderland is a show that I found on Netflix when it first came out like 2 years ago. It covers volume 1, 2, and 3 of the manga, okay? The manga was very hard to acquire here in the US. And while I'm fine reading subtitles if I need to read them to get caught up on what I want to watch, I can't read Japanese manga, okay? I just can't. So I had to wait for the US ones to come out. Season 2 of the show then came out this year, about a month ago now. And it concluded the show. And the ending's a bit out there, okay? And so I bought these mangas so that I can get caught up on it and see what the differences are. Now, generally, the manga and the show are pretty much kind of mostly the same. There's subtle differences, characters act a little bit differently, things like that, but overall, the show and the manga are pretty close to each other. The premise of the show is that our main characters all wake up in the Borderlands, and they then need to compete at child's games, but the losers are going to die. Kind of like Squid Games, but these individuals are stuck in this area. They didn't go there willingly to win a bunch of money. They went there because that's where they woke up. The main character went into the bathroom, came out, and discovered the entire city had been overrun by vegetation. It looks like it's been abandoned for quite some time. And then he's roaming around Japan, basically competing in these games where he makes multiple friends. And the whole idea of Alice in Borderland is, what are you willing to do to live? How far are you willing to go to live? And the constant question that comes up throughout the entire show and the manga is, why are they there? What is the Borderlands? Now, that is the overarching question, the story that runs through the whole show. But trust me when I tell you, what I'm about to discuss with you actually doesn't ruin the show, because the show is all about Arisu and his friends competing in these various games and who's going to survive and who's not. And I'm not going to spoil that by telling you the ending, because the manga doesn't actually. So I'm going to go to the ending now. Last spoiler warning. So in the show, Arisu and Usagi compete in the last game, which is a game of croquet. The queen who is in charge of this particular game, the challenge is to just finish 3 rounds of croquet. But the queen has the ability to make Arisu like delusional. He basically believes whatever she's going to say. The idea behind the last game is that he's going to give up of his own volition. He's just going to give up based on the things that she makes him believe. Okay? So what happens is she ends up throwing out these possibilities of what the Borderlands are. One of which is that him and his friends are all in VR, and they're there for the dopamine rush of competing for their lives. Another one is that aliens came down, and there are now high-paid individuals who are placing bets on the games, and that's what they're doing. And then there's also the possibility that he is just insane and coping with the loss of his friends who died on the very first day. All of that is thrown out as being a delusion. He eventually finishes the game of croquet, and the show then asks all of the survivors at this time, which I won't tell you because that will spoil you watching the show every season. It asks them, do they want to stay in the Borderlands as a citizen, or do they want to leave? And they all choose to leave. The show then takes us to show that a meteorite fell and actually caused mass death and destruction in Japan. That's what happened. So they all wake up after this. They all wake up, and what we find out is that the Borderlands was like a weird purgatory. They were between life and death. And the Borderlands was them basically finding a reason to continually live, to fight to go back to the real world, where they all then wake up. The injuries that they sustained in the Borderlands, we discover that they were injuries that they sustained in the accident. So one girl lost her leg, she lost her leg in the real world. And it's all revealed to kind of like be a dream-ish kind of thing, which to me was a little disappointing. The Netflix show then goes deeper into showing exactly how everyone survived. And it shows our main characters coming back together for a possible future. Arisu and Usagi. And the only two I'm going to reveal because they're kind of important to both the manga ending and the Netflix ending. So basically what it shows is that they have survived and that they're going to come together and possibly have a future together again. And it's an okay ending. It's happy. I was really hoping that there would be a lot more to the Borderlands, but it just turns out that it was basically purgatory. Now the show then ends on a kind of a tease of a possible season 3, which is where my research began. The show ends with a Joker card. Now, all the characters, all the enemies that they fight against are basically displayed as playing cards. And in order to get out, you have to defeat all of the face cards. Well, the face card we never saw was Joker. So at the end of the whole show, they ended on like a cliffhanger teaser of a Joker card on a table. And after the queen that they had just fought basically created a bunch of delusions, my wife and I were both like, well, does that mean that this ending is also a possible delusion? Is there a season 3? Now, it took forever for season 2 of Borderlands to come out, so I decided to look into the manga situation, and that's when I started buying these, the Alice in Borderland manga. And my assumption was that I would be able to read it to its ending and figure out what actually is going on and what the answers are. And it doesn't end. Okay, so this is volume 4. Volume 5 is the ending, and that doesn't come out until March. So I had to go online to read the rest of this. Apparently, Alice in Borderland was a big thing in a Shueisha magazine, and then it moved over to Shonen Jump towards the end of its life. It's had a few sequels at this point, but I was interested to know, how did the main one end? So that's the reason you're here. Did the manga end it differently, and what does the Joker card mean? Well, for the most part, the manga ends very similar to it. It is still purgatory. They all still wake up after a meteorite falls. But the difference between the manga and the show is, one, Joker. Joker's revealed towards the ending to be an actual person. He's drawn as like a smudge. I'll put him on the screen, but you don't really see who he is. Arisu assumes that Joker is the one who created the Borderlands and is deciding what's going on, to which Joker basically tells him, no, I'm just the man between life and death. And he's basically compared to the ferryman in like Greek and Roman literature by much of the Reddit and people who have read this. He's the guy that helps you get to go back to normal life, or if you're going to stay here in the Borderlands as a citizen. The manga then moves and shows Arisu waking up in the accident. And that's where it ends. We don't find out what happened to anyone else in the manga. The assumption is, since they all declare at the end of the manga that they want to go back, the assumption is they go back, that it ends. And it must end in a very similar way to the Netflix show. But what they do in the manga instead is they come back 2 years later. A reporter is at the spot of the accident and begins to ask people, what do they live for? And then the manga just goes through tons and tons of people. Now, since I didn't read the manga volume 1 all the way to 5, I don't know if these are people who showed up, because obviously the artwork for these people is going to be completely different than their Netflix portrayals. But it goes through and questions a whole bunch of people what their reason to live is. And the manga just gives a whole bunch of reasons why you'd want to live. And then after all of that, we finally get to see where Arisu and Usagi are in 2 years, kind of. It doesn't explicitly state what is going on, but what we do see is Arisu on the phone. And he's basically having a discussion with somebody that we don't know who it is. But if you watched the show and you know the character of Usagi, then you're going to kind of know who this is. But basically he talks to them and he says, did you decide where you want to go this weekend? Then he responds with, ugh, the mountains again. Please, this time can we go somewhere more tailored towards beginners? If you know the character Usagi, she was a rock climber and she wanted to go out and go mountain climbing. Her whole entire backstory is based around that. So it's a safe assumption that he is talking to her, which means they've all ended up together. They have. And then there's a few characters that do show up afterwards as like a quick thing. And I think they're supposed to be characters that were in the rest of the group. But once again, I did not read volume 1 to 4. I bought the collection hoping it would have a lot of differences. When I skimmed through this, most of it is the same. So I just ended up looking for the ending to see if the ending is different. Because if the ending was wholeheartedly different with a different cast, then I knew I needed to read the whole manga. But since the same cast is at the ending and it ends very much the same way, that was that. So that is Alice in Borderland. How does the manga end? Sadly, with the same ending. I kind of wish that there was more to this. I get the message that they were going for, that you need to fight tooth and nail to get back to your life. And I do like that, but I think I would have enjoyed it more if one of those alternative realities that the Queen brought up, like the VR one or the world where the aliens took over, maybe one of those is real. And I guess they tried sequels to this, but once you know what the Borderlands is, the sequels won't hit as hard. And from what I've read in the reviews, that's what a lot of people have said. So the show is still great. I do recommend it, even knowing that ending. If you watched all of this, if you like the concepts of like Squid Games, I haven't revealed who survives in the end other than Arisu and Usagi, so check out the show. I highly recommend it. You can kind of see all the characters going through it, making friends. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens in Alice in Borderlands, and I do recommend it. But overall, that is how the manga ends. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you've watched the show or read the comic, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And on that note, I'll see you guys later.